I want to say thank you so much for being here this morning, and thank you for being in the service. And I want to welcome those who are listening online as well. And some of you that I haven't even met, you have been reaching out to us. And so thank you so much online. And some of you who are at home watching the services, I really appreciate your feedback. And so very good. And you know what? I appreciate your feedback sitting here as well, all right? As long as it's positive, I can handle it, all right? Let's say anything negative, keep it to yourself, all right? And so, well, we're in the middle of a series right now about talking about the always God, the always God. And so the goal of this series is to remind us as a church today here in 2024 that the God who led the children of Israel in the past and is the same God who leads us and wants to lead us in our lives today. And so this always God is always there, and we've talked about how he's always speaking to us. We've talked about how he's always hearing us. And today we're going to look at how he's always seeing us, all right? And he's always seeing us. And I heard some of you say, oh, already? Won't point anybody out, Ken, but someone said that. And oftentimes when you talk about God seeing us, that's really the response you get, is that somehow God is there watching us to catch us up on our wrongdoings. And that's true. The God that we serve, he's there watching us, and we should be conscious of the things that we do and whether they are honoring to the Lord or not. But I want you to realize that God seeing us is way more than that. God seeing you and God seeing me is so much more intimate than that. And so today, as we share in this message about the always God and how he's always seeing us, I want us to, I think, explore one of the most comforting truths about God is that he does see us. This morning, just stop. Just stop and realize that where you sit right now, what you're going through, the things you're wrestling with, the things that maybe you feel like your friends don't understand that's happening to you, God sees you. He does. And that's the kind of God we have. He sees us. And he's a God that's always seeing us. And so as we explore this truth, as we explore what I call a very comforting truth, it can be scary, but I think overall it's comforting, is that God sees us. He sees us not just in the big moments and all the hoopla, not only when we're crying out for help and things maybe are going off the rails, but God sees us in our everyday lives. He sees us as in the small and seemingly insignificant details that maybe no one else sees, but God sees. He sees us. And so today as we explore this, I think we should find comfort in this truth that the always God is always seeing us. It's like a renowned artist who can see the potential beauty and even in a blank canvas, even before the first stroke of the paintbrush goes on. An experienced artist can see the beauty that's going to come from it all. Similarity, God, the creator, the one who made us, he sees us not as incomplete. He doesn't see us as broken. You may see yourself this morning as broken and incomplete. You may see yourself as someone who is just not worthy, all right? You may see yourself that way, but the God who sees us does not see us as incomplete or broken, but he sees us as a masterpiece that's in progress. Go ahead, elbow the person next to you and say, I'm a masterpiece. Who knew? Who knew? Who knew I was a masterpiece? Well, God sees you. You're that masterpiece that's in progress. And you may think, you know what? Who am I? Does he really see? If he saw me and really knew who I was, he wouldn't even like me. That's not true. That's a lie of the enemy itself. The always God is always seeing us. And he sees us not as we see ourselves, which oftentimes we see ourselves as flawed or unfinished. But God sees us as a work that's in progress and what he wants to shape us into be. And so today, as we go into this and how we remind ourselves today that the always God is always seeing, I want you to realize That when he looks in you, he's seeing more than just kind of catching you at what you do wrong. But he wants to see you and wants you to understand that he sees you so much more deeply than that. So much more beautiful than that. And so, again, we need to be conscious that he is the judge and he's the righteous judge because he does see us so deeply. But we need to remind ourselves the God that we serve, the always God, is much more than that. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10 reminds us that we're God's workmanship. We were created for good works. And so this morning, even as we launch into this message, even we may be here this morning, we may feel like a blank canvas, or we may feel like an incomplete project. We may feel like we're all messed up, we have nothing to offer. God sees us in his beautiful creation, and he wants to shape us into his image. The question is whether we'll allow him to or not. He's not going to force you to do anything you don't want to do. He's not going to make you be a person that you don't want to be, but he does want to shape you into something beautiful, that masterpiece in every way, if you let him. If you let him. And so today, if you have your Bibles and if you have your note sheets, we're going to be looking at Psalm 33. And we're going to be looking at, I narrowed it down to 3 verses that I really love when it comes to this subject about how God always sees us. So in Psalm 33, we're looking at verses 13 to 15. And I want us to look at that this morning because I want us to bring back into focus of how God's watchful eye is nothing short of his loving attention to us. And God's watchful eye should remind us of his constant care in our everyday lives. Doesn't matter what's going on, God is watchful of our lives and everything that's going on. And so we're going to look at today. And so Psalm 33, as we look at this, I want us to think about how often we've ever wondered if anyone ever notices us. Maybe you thought about that. Maybe you feel lonely or forgotten, that no one pays attention to you. Maybe you wonder if no one even notices you around. You could disappear and no one would even notice. I want you to know that's not true. That's not true at all. And as we look at Psalm 33, we're going to discover that sometimes when you may feel invisible, sometimes when you feel unnoticed and that you're unimportant, I'm here today to remind you that the always God is always seeing you. And he knows every detail of your life, and he's deeply, deeply, deeply concerned about you. Come on. He is deeply concerned about every detail of your life, and he sees you. And so in Psalm 33, let's read those verses, and I want to read them from the New Living Translation. Psalm 33 says this: "The Lord looks down from heaven, and he sees the whole human race." Now, we're going to break this down. "From his throne, he observes all who live on the earth. He made their hearts, so he understands everything they do." So this morning, I want to give you 3 truths that come from this passage, and I want you to realize that these 3 truths will show us how God sees us. God is always seeing us. And so beyond catching us in doing wrongdoings, here's how he sees us. Number 1, when you look at verse 13, it reminds us that God sees us completely. Completely. It says, "From the heavens the Lord looks down and sees all mankind." Doesn't matter where you go, doesn't matter where you are, God sees all mankind all over the world. When I look at this verse shows us that God's perspective is different than ours. Some people like to present God as someone who's far off and he's sitting and doing his throne thing, but he's not aware of what's happening in my life today. And that's not true. God is someone who looks down from heaven. He sees all mankind, but God's perspective is different than ours. He's not limited by time or space, all right? He sees everything from heaven. Now, I hope that gives you comfort today. Hopefully, you're not trying to hide, but he sees everything from heaven. He sees everything completely. And so it's really what it's trying to say to us. In other words, he watches all of humanity with a complete understanding of our circumstances. Let me say it again. He sees all of your circumstances. He sees what you're wrestling with. He sees the conversation you had with your neighbor. He knows how you're feeling right now. God sees all of your circumstances, and he sees you, and he understands. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. While people may overlook you or fail to grasp the challenges that you face, you ever have that conversation with someone, you tell them what you're going through, and you can see the blankness in their face? They don't have the slightest clue what you're struggling with as you articulate the words. That's not true with God. God understands, and he understands completely what we're going through. And so while other people may overlook us or fail to grasp the challenges we face, God never does. He knows what it's like to walk in your shoes. He does. You think no one else understands what I have to deal with? Oh yeah, there is. And he loves you. And he wants you to know he sees you. And he understands what you're feeling. So whether you're an older person struggling with loneliness and not knowing what to do, or maybe you feel like you got a lack of friendships and things like that, God knows what you're feeling. He understands what you're going through. He sees you. And he says, I want to be there for you. And he sees us completely. The word sees here within this text, within verse 13, the word sees here means more than a casual glance. It's a deep, penetrating observation. Man, oh man, Helen's here this morning, and when Helen and I are at different events, I know that when I'm speaking up front or everything, I know that people see me. But when she walks into a room, I know she sees me. She's got that deep, penetrating glance, all right? Especially if my fly's down, all right? So she sees me, and it's different. I know that she sees me, and we can be in a crowded room, but we see each other. We know each other. God sees you that way. He sees you through everything that's going on around you with that deep, penetrating observation. He says, I see you. I know what you're going through. I know what you're struggling with, and you can come to me, and you can lay your burdens down to me, and I want to be there for you. I see you. God sees us completely. It's more than that casual glance. It's that deep, penetrating look. God doesn't just see the surface of your life. He sees your heart. He sees your struggles. He sees your joys. He's fully aware of the things that you are going through that maybe you can't even express to others, but he sees you completely. Kind of imagine it a little bit like this. Imagine it like a magnifying glass. A magnifying glass is amazing. You take a magnifying glass and you look at an insect, or if you take that magnifying glass and you look at a small object, the glass enlarges the object, making it more clear, more detailed. In a similar way, God's view of us is not distant, it's not blurry. He sees every detail in our lives, both the good and the bad and the ugly. But he also, let's not stop there, God also sees the potential that we have and who we can become through his amazing grace. God sees the potential that you have. You may see yourself incomplete. Matter of fact, it says that in Corinthians, for now we know in part. One day we shall fully know. That's not true for God. He sees you completely right now. And he not only sees all that you're going through, the good and the bad and the ugly, he sees the potential that you have, the person that you can become. You may feel like you're broken and incomplete. God sees you and says, no, by my grace, I can mold you and shape you and use you in a way you never fathomed that you could be used. So just like as the magnifying glass brings clarity, God sees every part of us in perfect clarity. Despite of our imperfections that we think we have, we know we have, God sees us and he loves us deeply with that penetrating, deep love. So this morning, I want you to realize, even on that first point, as you think about your daily life, As you get up and brush your teeth, and you definitely should do that in the morning, all right? As you get up and brush your teeth, as you go to work, as you work hard, mom and dad, caring for your family, and you feel like maybe they don't appreciate it, God sees you completely, and he understands. When you're stressed out about meeting deadlines and struggling to balance all your responsibilities between home and work, you have a God who's always seeing you, and you can call on him. He's not like a distant observer, but he's a loving Father who knows your needs, and nothing, absolutely nothing, escapes his notice. When you're there at work trying to make difficult decisions, you can lift up a prayer and say, Heavenly Father, I know you see me right now in the middle of my work. I need your help to make the right decision. God sees you, and this leads me into my second point. God watches us with purpose. All right? He's not only seeing us, but God has a purpose he wants to unfold in our lives. And so in verse 14, as we think about how God watches us with purpose, in verse 14 it says, from his dwelling place he watches, and there's that word, all who live on earth. The psalmist is trying to communicate here how God is actively, and here's the difference, he's actively watching you. In other words, even in Romans, it talks about how God works out all things to the good for those who love the Lord. That's a very active thing to do. That's the kind of God we have. And so when it says God is actively watching us, the idea here is not that God is simply observing us from a distance, but he's watching us with purpose. He's intentionally there trying to invest in our lives and help us to become the person we need to be. He's trying to help us to realize that there's purpose in the circumstances you're going through. And I know that's hard. Some of us have gone through some pretty tough stuff. I was even watching again that old testimony by Joni Tata Erickson, if I have her name right. Johnny. Yes, Johnny. Thank you. And I was watching her testimony again, and I'm just amazed at all that she went through and how she recognized that in the midst of all the physical trauma she went through, she was able to see God's hand and purpose through it all. Not right away, but she did. So as God watches us, he doesn't watch us and say, wow, that's interesting. I sure hope they do okay. God doesn't watch us that way. God is saying, oh boy, I want to help them out here. I want to help them to see how they can take this and see how the good can come out of it. He's actively involved in our lives. He wants to use even the roughest of circumstances to mold us and help us to see his purpose. So his watching is purposeful and intentional. He's invested in our lives. God is not indifferent or uninvolved in our lives. He's not that distant force that sometimes we wonder, is he really there? Yes, he is. Stop asking that question. He's there, especially if we're a believer today. He is there. He's not that distant force. And sometimes when life gets tough, we may feel that God is far away, and that's okay to have those feelings, but at the same time, we need to remind ourselves, as the truth is that his eye is always on us. His eye is always on us. His watchful care is there, which means he is intimately aware of what we're going through, and he's working on it, folks. We used to sing a song in Sunday school that says, he's still working on me. You know what? That's the way it is. And God is right there investing every step of the way to mold us into the people we ought to be. He sees us. But he's actively involved in our lives. He's not off in a distance doing something else. He's watchfully caring for us, taking care of us, and working things out for the good. I compare that to a shepherd who's watching over his sheep. A shepherd, he doesn't just casually look in the direction of his sheep. When a shepherd looks at his sheep, he watches them carefully. He watches to make sure there's no wolves nearby, ensuring that they're safe. He guides them away from the dangers and for places they shouldn't be. And he's watching to lead them into the good pastures and not the bad pastures that really aren't going to satisfy them. And so that shepherd leads them to those good pastures. And folks, this morning, this is how God watches over us, the good shepherd. And so even when we stray, even when we face challenges, he's always guiding us back. He's always watchfully there, keeping us close to him. That should fire you up. That should make you excited about living your life as a follower of Jesus Christ. So this morning, in your daily walk, when things feel overwhelming and the stress and the pressures are there, or when you question whether God sees you in the details of your daily struggles, remember he is actively watching you. He's wanting to work things out. When you go through health issues, financial struggles, relationship challenges, God knows, he sees you, and is working behind the scenes to accomplish his purpose. What a great God we serve. And that leads me to my final point this morning. All right? I'll get preaching here in a moment. All right? The third point is that God not only sees us completely, he not only watches over us with purpose, but finally this morning I want you, there's one other aspect of him seeing us that ties into this. And that brings us to verse 15, is that God understands us intimately. All right? Helen says, or may look at me some days and go, man, Mark, I don't understand you. Well, my backup is, well, God does. God understands us intimately. Notice in verse 15, it says, he who forms the hearts of all, who can, and here's those 4 words, at least in my translation, who considers everything they do. So this verse is powerful because it tells us that God not only sees us, but in this verse, he's trying to tell us he understands us. He knows our hearts because he made your heart. He made you this morning. So if you're here and your heart is beating and you're going through life, I want you to realize you're not here by accident. In God's economy, there are no accidents. You're here for a purpose. You're here because you're a precious life, a soul. And he understands you. He knows our hearts because he made us. He knows why we feel the way we feel and why we act the way we do. He knows our deepest desires. He knows our deepest fears. He knows what motivates us, things that maybe others would miss. God understands. And maybe you're here this morning, or maybe you're listening online and you feel like you've been in those circumstances where nobody understands. God does. He does. And again, this personal knowledge should be comforting because it means that God understands us in a way that others can't. It should motivate us to, in the midst of our concerns, to fall to our knees and say, God, I need you because I know you understand. The Bible says he considers everything they do, which means, when it says that, is that he weighs our actions, he weighs our motives with perfect wisdom, and God's understanding is not a general thing. Oh, I understand, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not. God, when he says it's understand, he understands you personally. He understands you very specifically, what you're going through, when no one else does. What an incredible God we have. Again, think about the artist. Sometimes when you go to the art in the park or someplace down here and you begin to talk to an artist about a piece of work they did, they know every brush stroke. Oh, that stroke there, that means this. And sometimes I thought, oh, you're just telling me anything I want to hear to tell me the piece. All right? But an artist knows every stroke. They know why they chose the color that they chose. The artist knows everything about it. They know every detail about their painting. They can explain each stroke of their brush and why they chose what they did. Well, God, who is the greatest creator, knows every detail about our lives, even with greater care. He knows the thoughts that keep us up at night. How many of you have thoughts that keep you up at night? You know, I know we're going into a renovation campaign as a small church, and sometimes I wake up in the night and go, oh Lord, what did I do? All right. But God knows what keeps you up at night. He knows the heartache that you have as a mom or dad as you pray for your kids, as you think about the tragedies that your home may be experiencing, the thoughts that keep you up at night, the joys that you celebrate, the things that you regret. God sees you intimately. He understands what you're going through. You don't need to run off and talk to someone else. Sometimes you don't even need to go to a counselor, even though counselors are absolutely essential in life, I think. But you know what? You have a God, folks, who understands what you're going through and what you're experiencing. So this morning, as I close out this message, I want to tell you again, whatever you're facing today, know that God sees you. He sees your heart. He understands your situation, even when others don't. Even when you're misunderstood, even when you feel isolated, remember that the one who forms your heart understands you completely. You can trust him with your deepest concerns because he already knows what they are and he cares about you anyway. As a young man coming to the Lord, I grew up in a totally unchurched home. I had no church background. We weren't Catholic. We weren't Protestant. We just didn't go anywhere. We had an elderly lady on our street who tried to get us to go to Sunday school a couple of weeks a year, and she tried to get the Ten Commandments and the Beatitude into us. And she's the closest thing I know to a saint, because for us farm boys, where we lived in rural New Brunswick, I mean, just to get us into the pickup truck and get us over to a church, that was quite a masterful piece to do, all right? And if Dad hadn't intervened, it wouldn't have happened. And so, but growing up in that background, sometimes I knew who I was, and I knew the kind of person I was. So when it came to the point where I heard that Christ wanted to use me, I had a hard time to believe it. I said, doesn't he know who I am? Doesn't he know the things that I've done, the things that I've said? And I've come to realize over the year that he is an amazing God, because even though he saw everything about me, he had mercy on me. And this morning, I'm trying to get us to realize that in this world today, that you have a God who sees you. He's not in a distance. He's not just a religious figure that we talk about, or some kind of symbol that we hang around our neck. He is a living God who sees you, who loves you. He wants to work everything out to the good. He wants to help you to be the person that you really need to be, not what the world wants you to be, what God wants you to be. And he's there for you. I want you to know that God, a God that sees you and loves you and cares for you. I close with this story. A little boy was standing in the kitchen staring at the fresh batch of cookies. Oh boy, that's one of my favorite scenes, all right? And so the fresh batch of cookies were there on the counter, and Mom had told him, don't you touch those cookies until after dinner. And but to the little boy, they looked so good, and they were his favorite cookies, and he was so hungry. And so he did what any child might do. I know our children would never have done this, all right? But he did what any child might do. He quietly looked around to make sure that Mom wasn't watching. And once he was sure the coast was clear, he grabbed the cookie, stuffed it in his pocket, and of course, feeling pretty proud of himself, he tiptoed out of the kitchen. And just as he was getting to the edge of the room, as he's walking down the hall, he heard his mom's voice say, I saw that. I saw that. And so startled, he kind of froze in his tracks, and he's thinking, how did she see me? I was so good. How did she see me? And so he carefully turned around, only to realize that he had completely missed the great big giant mirror that was hanging on the wall. And so the whole scene, as it unfolded, was reflected so that Mom could see it. This morning, just like the boy who thought he could sneak a cookie without anyone noticing, sometimes we think we can go through life without anyone seeing us. We think we can. We think we're going to get off scot-free. But I want you to know God sees us. He sees our actions. Yes, any wrongdoings, he sees that. But I hope you realize this morning that he sees you much more than just catching you when you do something wrong. He sees you and he wants to help you. He wants to mold you into the man you need to be, the woman you need to be, the person you need to be. Psalm 33 should remind us all that he sees us, everything we do, everything we think, everything we feel. Nothing is hidden from him. He lovingly watches over us, guiding us, protecting us every step of the way. And so this morning, as I close out this message, I want to ask you, is that the kind of God that you see? Is that the God you've been introduced to, or have you been introduced to a God who only sees you because he wants to drop the hammer on you because you did something wrong? Don't hear me wrong. God's justice is real. But it's not about that only. He sees you, and he wants to be there for you if you'll let him. So today, my request of you is it time for you to see God the way he should be seen? Have you been looking through a lens you shouldn't be looking through and seeing a God that doesn't exist? Or maybe a God that was modeled for you that really isn't the God of the Bible? God sees you. Do you see him? I'm here to ask you today to stop and realize God sees you and he loves you. He sees you completely. He sees you with purpose. And he sees you and understands you intimately more than anyone else will. But will you stop and surrender your life to him? As our worship team comes, and as we sort of play this final song, and I'd like you to stand this morning if you would please, and if you're able, let's stand together. As we close out this service, my request to you as a pastor is that God sees you. Do you see him? Is it time where you need to stop and maybe say, Lord, I've been running from you. I've been fighting you. I've been doubting you. I've been doing everything I can to make excuses. But God, I need to stop, and I need you to see me because I need your help. This morning, as we sing this song in closing, here at Spotlight Church, if you want to do business with God, you can step out from where you are. We're a family here this morning. You can step out from where you are. You can walk down the aisle, come and kneel here at a chair. Pastor Nicholas will step aside and come and kneel here, and you can kneel here at the front. And I want you to do business with God. I know he sees you. The question is, do you see him? Are you surrendered to him? If not, let this be the day that you surrender to him.